Yo, what's up guys? So today we are gonna see, What If, and Possible Met Naruto and Fell in Love with Him, movie. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Moretsuna Sora. Link is in the description, and also subscribe to my channel, and like this video. Let's begin the video. And Possible let out a tired sigh, as she got ready for work without so much of a glance from her husband. She remembered how he used to playfully stare at her while she changed, which always led to them having some fun before work. But for the last few months, for whatever reason, he hadn't so much as kissed her except for the light kiss on the cheek while heading out the door for work. Am I not attractive anymore? And thought with a frown, as she stared at herself in the mirror. She might be the mother of 3 children, but according to many of her friends she didn't see it. She still had a bit of stretch marks on her stomach, but they were faint, and could only really be seen if you looked close due to the completion of her soft tan skin that was proof that she liked to relax and tan under the sun. Her body, even at her mid-30s, wasn't succumbing to gravity much if at all, as her sikapu pious and plump rear were still perky and firm, as they have always been. She might have gained some weight on her butt and stomach, but that wasn't enough to call her fat, as she was still in great shape. Is it because I haven't lost this weight yet? 'Cause I've been trying, she thought with a frown, as she turned around in the mirror, looking herself over, as she wore a light blue pair of bra and underwear with a matching garter belt, and stockings that she had started to wear commonly to maybe entice James, but to no avail. She sighed in minor exhaustion, as she moved her thoughts off the sore subject, and started to get ready for work. Today was a unique day from her usual day, as today her hospital was gaining a medical prodigy. His name was Naruto Uzumaki, who had graduated medical school at 18, and finished his residency at his current age of 22. He did this all in his hometown in Japan before deciding to move to America. She wasn't sure what his reason was, since with his credentials he could get hired in any hospital around the world, but she was thankful that he chose her hospital since she had heard only great things about his skill. She smiled at her daughter, as she walked out into the kitchen, as her twin boys ran past her. "Slow down, boys, there's no need to run like that in the house," she chided them, as they just kept running, making her sigh, and wonder if any male in this family paid attention to her. "What's wrong, Mom? You look tired," Kim asked, as inside, and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Just stressed about today going well, since today the hospital is getting a new doctor," she said, as she sat down at the table for a second, as Kim furrowed her brow and thought. "Oh, that Naruto Uzumaki that you mentioned is coming today?" Kim asked, as An nodded, and showed her a picture of Naruto that the hospital had given her so that she could know what he looks like. "Wow, he is a major hottie," Kim said, surprised, as she expected him to be much more adult and older instead of how young he actually looked in the photograph, and chuckled slightly with a smirk, as she saw her daughter basically drool over the picture. "Yeah, he's only 22 years old, and I have to do everything to make sure his welcome is warm since he brings a lot of skill to our hospital," and said, as Kim's communicator started beeping. "Oh dang, that's Wade. Sorry Mom, I hope everything goes well for you today at work. I love you. Bye," Kim said hurriedly, as she left the house quickly for school, leaving her alone in the house, as she heard James's car start and drive off, most likely with the twins in tow. "Well, I guess I'll just head to work without a kiss. Nothing new," she thought with a sigh before she left for work to greet the new doctor, Upperton Medical Center, and groaned, as she weaved through the traffic of doctors and nurses to make sure she was where she needed to be by the time he arrived at the hospital. She couldn't be late since she was the chief of surgery for the hospital, so she needed to be there with the chief of medicine in time. And, just in time, he just arrived, and is coming here, he said, as An nodded, and dusted off her coat before composing herself, as they both watched Naruto Uzumaki walk into their hospital. He was tall, at least 6 feet tall, wearing a light gray dress shirt and black jeans, as his hands were inside of the pockets of his doctor's coat. He looked a bit intimidating, as his strong blue eyes stared ahead of him behind the almost mane of spiky dark red hair that went down to the end of his back, and spiked out in every direction, unaffected by gravity. His red was different from hers, as his was the actual red color, like blood, as that was the first thing that came to mind. When she had first seen a picture of him, his nickname of Life's Blood made sense, as the red hair really did have the color of blood. She couldn't help but stare at his cheeks, as each one had 3 lines on them like whiskers, something he apparently inherited from his mother's side of the family. "Dr. Naruto Uzumaki, we here at Upperton are welcome to have you here," the chief of medicine said, as Naruto pulled his hand out of his pocket and accepted the outstretched hand. "Happy to be here. I have heard nothing but great things with the advancements made here," he said before he turned to her, and she felt herself inhale sharply, as the blue eyes pierced through her from behind his mane of hair. "And you must be Dr. Impossible, the brain surgeon, and great doctor that has brought this hospital so much praise." I have read all your papers, and I really enjoy the one you wrote about the effects of damage on the parietal lobe, and how to tend to it when healing, he said with a large smile, as she swore she could feel her cheeks heating up. Why thank you Dr. Uzumaki, she said before he held up his hand. Please call me Naruto. I've never been one for people I work with calling me titles, and since, as a surgeon under your employment it feels odd, he said with a chuckle, as she nodded, and chuckled along. Fine, as long as you call me in. But, as I was saying, I have heard great things about you, and look forward to working with you a lot, she said, as he smiled, and accepted her hand, shaking it, as she felt his strong hand wrap around hers. Sounds like a deal. I can honestly say I am going to really like it here. I can feel it, he said, as he looked at the hospital with a smile, an infectious one, as in couldn't help but agree. 2 weeks later, and could only smile, as she sat down at her usual lunch table with Naruto, who had quickly become her work friend. Working with him was very interesting, and fun, as he was an interesting man. He was a great doctor that was very serious when it came to helping people, especially children, as he thought they shouldn't be in hospitals, and instead being children like they were supposed to. He was also quick to defend them, as she once had to calm him down when a deadbeat refused to give bone marrow to his daughter. Of course she wanted to punch him, as well, but couldn't, as they were doctors, but was happy to look the other way, as he frightened the father to change his mind. It was some time after that patient they had started to get closer. She never spent time with him outside of work due to their own lives, but they spent a majority of their workday together, often talking about a variety of topics, and even spent almost every lunch together. So how was your day, Naruto? Anne asked, as she set down the tray of cafeteria food down on the table they often shared. I've had a good day, stuck with clinic duty, but it all is going good enough, he said with a chuckle, as Anne patted his back consolingly. We all have to log out clinic hours, she said, as he chuckled. What about you, Anne? How's your day been? He asked, as she shrugged her shoulders. Normal day of normal stuff, she said before she set down her cup, as she saw her daughter wander into the cafeteria. Kim, what are you doing here? She asked, and stood up so her daughter could see her. Well, school ended early today, and I wanted to drop by and visit you, Kim said, as she looked at the redhead that she remembered seeing a picture of. You must be my mom's new colleague, she told me about a while ago. Nice to meet you, my name's Kim, she added, as he smiled at and before standing up and holding out his hand. Nice to meet you too, Kim. Your mom has talked about you and the twins a lot. And finally meeting you, I am assured that Anne's beauty was passed on to you, he said with a soft smile, as he shook Kim's hand while she and Anne both softly blushed at his compliment. Well, thanks, Dr. Uzumaki, Kim said with a soft giggle, as he chuckled and shook his head. Please, just call me Naruto, he said with a smile, as Kim was thankful for a relaxed doctor for once, as she grew curious about how his mom was at work, and couldn't help but smile and chuckle as she saw her daughter interact with her work friend. She knew he was great with kids, as all the children down in pediatrics loved him, but to see him get along with her daughter made him seem even better. She smiled somewhat mischievously, as she cleared her throat. Okay, enough flirting with my daughter, mister, she teased, as she watched Kim blush furiously, as Naruto chuckled. Oh my, I didn't know that counted as flirting. I should be careful since I act like this with you, and I wouldn't want people to think badly, he teased back, as Anne's cheeks heated up, as her daughter smiled at her smugly, and couldn't see her daughter's or Naruto's eyes, as she didn't expect it to be turned around on her. Our lunch break is almost over, Kim. You should probably head back home or something, Anne said, as Kim chuckled and stood up. Okay, Mom. Have fun at work, Kim said, sending a teasing look to her mom before leaving. Well, your daughter sure is interesting, especially since she is the globe-trotting superhero, Naruto said with a smile, as he and Anne waved to Kim, as she turned around to wave one last time before exiting the cafeteria. Yeah, sometimes I have to remember she is still a teenager, hence her mischievous personality, Anne said, as he chuckled. Another thing she inherited from you? He asked, as Anne looked down at the table before taking a drink from her cup, essentially answering his question with her refusal to answer. He laughed, as he took a drink from his cup before he snapped his fingers, remembering something he had almost forgotten. Hey, odd question, but I was wondering if you could help me get some stuff from my place. It's just I don't have too many female friends, and knowing me I'd pick something gaudy and awful. I mean, my last couch was bright orange, so that kind of proves it, he said with a nervous frown, as he rubbed the back of his neck. I mean, I can repay you, maybe get you some food or something, he said nervously before and stopped him with a chuckle. Well, I can't let you make another mistake like that. The mother in me won't let me, so sure. I can help you after work, she said with a smile, as he let out a relieved sigh. Oh good, cause my mom said if I get another couch like that she'd knock some sense into my head. And trust me, my mom hits hard, he said with a chuckle, as Anne smiled at him. Well, now I really can't refuse if it is to help clear the mind of another mother. She probably worries about you getting a good meal, doesn't she? Anne asked, as he chuckled dryly, which only made Anne giggle. That's what I figured. Tell your mom you are fine because you are going to enjoy a homemade meal at least once a week at my house, she said, as he widened his eyes slightly. You don't have to do that, Anne. I don't want to be a bother, he said, as she shook her head. No bother, you're my friend, aren't you? So it isn't any bother, Anne said, as he frowned, and was about to reply before he saw something that shocked him into silence. Anne had turned to him, pouted her lips, and made her eyes glisten, as she gave him a look that reminded him instantly of a puppy. What is that? He asked, as he couldn't look away, as her lips started to quiver. He felt his resolve quickly break, as he sighed. Fine, just stop that look. It's torture to look at me that cute, and think I can say no, he said, as Anne's look stopped, and she pumped her fist in victory. So should I drop by your house to pick you up or what? He asked, as Anne smiled. That sounds fine, she said, as she silently cheered in her head that her puppy dog Pout still had power. What did that look like? He asked, as he was still shaking off how cute she looked. Oh, my trademark puppy dog Pout. It's a powerful tool, me and my daughter know, and said with a wink, as she got up to put her tray away, making Naruto sigh, as he could feel that he would be manipulated by that Pout many more times in the future if he continued to hang out with an possible household, and sighed, as she put the dishes from dinner into the sink, as Kim helped put the leftovers. Thanks for the help, Kim. Can you maybe do some of the dishes? I need to get ready cause a friend of mine is taking me to help them shop, she said, as Kim smiled. Is this friend Naruto? Kim asked, as Anne rolled her eyes. Yes, he needs help picking out furniture for his new place, and I don't want him to pick out a bright orange couch again, and said, as they both shivered at how bad that would be. Go, I got this, Mom, Kim said with a chuckle, as Anne kissed her daughter on the forehead, and went to tell James about it. James, are you here? Anne asked out, as she walked into the garage, which was mainly James's little workshop. Yeah, come on, James replied while he kept his head down in whatever he was working on. I was just going to warn you that I have to leave for a bit to go shopping with a work friend of mine, so I'll be back home late, she said, as she crossed her arms under chest, a bit annoyed, as he didn't even look up. Yeah, that's fine, have fun, James said, as he nodded, and waved at her while he continued to tinker with his project, and frowned slightly, as she recognized the tone he was using, as though I'm not actually listening to what you are saying, and just responding to your voice tone. Yeah, and I plan to help him break in his bed, you know, with some fun activities, she said with a frown, as she tested to see if he was listening. Sounds fun. Hope you have a good time, James said, as he waved her off, making her grit her teeth to resist getting angry at him, as she felt her phone buzz, alerting her of a text. Hey, I'm almost there. A few seconds away. I feel slightly awkward going bed shopping with my boss, but hey, you insisted. Just don't think I am doing this for a promotion. It read, as she let out a giggle, as she could almost hear his sarcastic tones speak it out. Well, whatever, James. I'll be back around 9 at the latest, she said, as she looked at her watch to see it was only 6. Kim, you're in charge of the twins while I am away. Keep them from burning down the house, and yelled out, as she grabbed her jacket, and slipped out of the house quickly. She smiled, as she saw Naruto's sleek black Mercedes pull up to her house. Hey, Anne, hope I didn't like to make you end dinner early or anything, he said with a slight frown, as he slid across the hood of his car, and opened the door for her. You didn't, we always end around this time, she said, as she got into the car, smiling at him, as he closed the door, and slid back across the hood. Oh, that's good. So for furniture I was thinking of this one local place off Main Street, he said, as she shook her head. I know somewhere much better with even better pieces. The owner owes my daughter for saving his business from being destroyed by robot debris, so it'll be best to go there, she said, as smiled, actually enjoying this little excuse to get out of the house, and relax, thankful that Naruto asked her out to help him. Well, if the boss says so, then I'm inclined to listen since I don't want to lose my job, he joked with a smirk, as Anne chuckled at the joke. Well, if you do end up getting another gaudy orange couch, I'd have to start poking around in your head to see what is wrong with it, she said, as he held his hand to his chest, as if the comment hurt him. Well, keep those hands off me or I might have to go to HR, he said in a clearly joking and fake hurt tone, as she jokingly shoved him before they laughed, and pulled out of her driveway. 4 months later, and let out a sigh, as she hurriedly packed for an out-of-town medical conference that she and Naruto were being sent to. It was only for a week, but was very important for her hospital, hence why they were sending 2 of their best doctors to it. She was very thankful that Naruto was being sent with her since over the few months they had gotten even closer friends, to the point he was often over at their house for dinner or she was out with him around the town to grab some food after a very late shift at the hospital. They had gotten so close that Kim teasingly called him Haran, as they were almost always spending time together. Her head looked up, as she saw James walk into their bedroom in a rush of his own almost. "James, can we talk for a second?" she asked, as he frowned and looked up to her. "Can't, and I have to hurry back to work. They need my help on the big project we are working on," he said, as Anne frowned at him. "James, I'm leaving for a week on a conference, and I was maybe hoping we could make love like we always used to whenever one of us goes out of town," Anne said with a slight, pleading tone. "And I don't have the time to talk right now. We can figure this out later," James said, as if he didn't even hear what she had asked. "We never have time to talk, James, or be like husband and wife. Please, let us talk about this and wind out," as James had given her the habitual kiss on the cheek, and was already walking out of the bedroom, leaving Anne alone in the room. She was always torn up by how in public, and in front of the kids he would actually pay attention to her slightly, but the second they were alone his communication and overall interest in her would plummet. It increased more so once his workload increased. Of course it used to be that he would always be able to notice when she needed him and tear himself away, but ever since their marriage started to disintegrate he never seemed to be able to, even getting to the point that he sometimes phased her out in front of the kids, and was about to storm after him, but stopped as she noticed the time, and felt her phone buzz before she answered it. "Yes? What is it?" she asked in a slightly snippy tone that she didn't mean to let out. "Oh, sorry if I called at a bad time. I was just calling to tell you I am almost there to pick you up so we can get to the airport," Naruto said with a worried tone. "Is everything okay with you?" he asked as she sighed. "Sorry, you did nothing wrong. My packing is just annoying, as it always is," she lied with a frown. "I'll be ready by the time you get her. Just come inside, as the door is unlocked," she said with a sigh. "Okay, I'll see you then I guess," said before hanging up to let her get back to packing, and could only groan as she stared back at her suitcase before shaking it off. "You know what, I'm tired of being tired. I'm going to have fun on this trip for once, and forget about all this drama," she thought with a determined look, as she went fully into packing, and since their hotel had a great pool she even decided to pack her bathing suit. "Anne, are you ready?" Naruto's voice called out, as she was thankfully just zipping up her suitcase, and grabbed her carry-on to meet him at the door of her bedroom. "Yeah, all ready to go," she said with a smile, as he picked up her bag, and walked with her out of the house. She had already said goodbye to Kim and the twins when they left for school, and James had already left so they made quick work to the airport, and was kind of stuck in her head, thinking of everything that was happening with her, so she kind of just walked aimlessly, making Naruto lead her through the airport, and set everything up. It wasn't until she sat down in the first-class seat next to Naruto, and felt him grab her hand did she snap out of it. "Anne, what's wrong? You've been out of it the whole drive to the airport, as well as the walk through it," Naruto asked with a frown, as Anne shook her head. "It's nothing, Naruto. Don't worry yourself over it," she said, as Naruto's frown deepened. "I can't, you're my friend, Anne, and I don't like it when you frown. You look much more beautiful when you smile," he said with a caring smile, as she couldn't help but blush. Being called beautiful by a younger man really seemed to fluster her, as well as the feeling of his hand linked with hers. "Thank you, that really means a lot, but it's just problems between married people. Nothing to worry about," she said with a happy smile, as the compliment was a massive confidence boost, and with how she hadn't been getting any from her home life it meant even more to her. "Okay, but this is a business trip vacation and enjoy yourself, and forget about home life," he said, as he gave her hand a squeeze. "It's hard to forget about it all," she said, as he chuckled. "Well, allow me to take your mind off of it," he said before she raised an eyebrow at him. "Not like that, you perv. I swear you are worse than my teenage patience," he said with a smirk, as her blush grew, and she used her free hand to smack him in the chest. She couldn't help but chuckle with a smile on her face, as she could always count on Naruto to cheer her up. He always did have a way of cheering her up, whether it be just because she was having a bad day or because she lost a patient. Of course, with them being the close friends they were, it went both ways, though she was oddly able to cheer him up much easier it seemed. "See, you're smiling now, so it seems I'm helping," he said, as she chuckled and smiled. "So now just relax and enjoy the first-class flight that the hospital sent us on. Plus when we get to the hotel we only have one day of meeting, so the rest we can use to relax," he added, as Anne nodded. "He's right, I can relax here. I don't have to worry about my marriage for a week. This will be good for me. I can feel it," she thought, as she didn't even care that she was still holding Naruto's hand, as she was too caught up in the fact that she could actually relax for once. Next day, and so far was loving the hotel. She and Naruto had been given conjoined rooms, a single door separating them, which remained open unless one was changing or in the shower. She had always felt being alone in hotel rooms had a disconcerting feeling to her, so keeping the door open made it feel like she wasn't alone in the room. They had spent the first day when they had arrived at the hotel, which was connected to the convention center in Las Vegas, getting settled and relaxing, as the plane trip tired them out more than they thought it would, and smiled as she looked out her window, glad that the early summer weather was warm and clear. You know what, Naruto? I think we should visit the pool, she said loud enough for him to hear in his room, as he rested on his bed, reading a book. Well, it is nice outside. Why not? Naruto said, as he walked over to the door of their connected rooms. Do you want to go now? He asked, as she nodded. No better time, so just close the door, and I'll meet you down there, she said with a smile, as he chuckled, and gave her a salute before closing the door. And, while feeling a bit weird wearing a bikini in front of her friend, figured he wouldn't mind. He did tell her to relax, as they were on a mini vacation, so she figured it would be fine. She was thankful she didn't grab one of her more revealing bikinis that she normally packed instinctively for James. This bikini was a soft orange one with a tube top style top with thin straps to keep it in place, and her bottoms were the usual style. They were both orange in coloring, but she could tell they were of different sets, as she remembered this top, and was thankful she only had the top of it, and not the bottom, as the bottom was very revealing. The fact that it was orange, Naruto's favorite color, was a coincidence, as orange was her best color, as it accented her hair and tan skin tone. She smiled as she adjusted her bikini before she grabbed her towel, tan lotion, and sunglasses before she left her room for the pool, and was a bit surprised as she got to the pool by how little people were there while she looked around for Naruto. Wow, you look like a fox, Naruto's voice teased behind, as she turned around, and was shocked by the appearance of her young friend. He wore a pair of red shorts that had a black chain design around the left leg, but that wasn't what shocked her. She knew he worked out, but the definition of his abs and muscles were much more than she had expected. Yeah, and you look like a lion, she teased back, as she tore her eyes away from his abs and smirked up at him, as he rolled his eyes. How original, he said with a smirk. So what are you going to do first? Maybe take a quick lap, he asked, as she shook her head. Nope, maybe going to tan a bit, she said, as he rolled his eyes. She let out a loud squeak, as suddenly she was picked up in a bridal carry by Naruto, who smiled down at her. She struggled not to blush, as she felt his strong arms under her, and his hands on her legs and thighs. Being this close to Naruto, leaning against his chest, was the closest she had been to a man since James started not paying attention to her. It was also the closest she had ever been another man since marrying James. That is no fun, and you got to enjoy the water, he said, as he started to walk nearer to the pool. No, set me down, she squealed out, as he smiled and shook his head. No can do, he yelled, as he jumped into the pool, as she had to close her eyes, as she quickly found herself plunged in the water, and rose to the water first, as she couldn't help but laugh at the situation before she saw Naruto burst up a few feet from her, his red hair matted down by the water, making it look straight instead of the usual spikiness of it. I can't believe you did that, she yelled in between laughs, as she tried her best to frown at him only for him to smile under his wet mane of hair, his mouth being the only part of his face visible. Well, you need to have some fun, and I consider it my duty to make sure you do, he said, as he smirked and shook his hair, spraying her with water, as she laughed and tried to swim away. You aren't getting away that easily, Naruto said with a large smile, as he splashed a wave of water at her, making her giggle. Come on, stop, I'm too old for this, she squealed, as he rolled his eyes and splashed her again. Stop with this, your old excuse, you are no way old. Also, you are never old enough to have some fun, he said, as she laughed and nodded. Fine, I'll have some fun, she said, as she splashed him back with a smile. Her smile couldn't help but grow, as for once she felt like she was an actual teenager again due to Naruto. He always had a way of making her feel young again. They continued their splash fight until the lifeguard forced them to stop, though their laughter continued while they got out of the pool. That really was fun, and admitted, as she used her towel to dry off. Well, I'm glad I was able to get you to relax, Naruto said with a smile before he froze, as he looked in over, just now noticing the bikini she was wearing, and slightly blushed, as she noticed Naruto looking her over. What? Is this too revealing for an old lady like me? I knew I should have packed a one-piece, she said, a bit self-conscious before he quickly shook his head. And no, you look really great in it, he said, as he took a step closer to her with a nervous smile. You're just flattering an old woman, she said, dismissing him before she stopped, as Naruto stepped closer to her, to the point they were nearly right up against each other. I'm not doing that. You truly are beautiful, and nowhere near old in any meaning of the word, he said, unknowingly cupping and stroking her cheek, as her face grew beet red. They continued to stare at each other before Naruto widened his eyes and took a step back, moving his hand away, and making and realize he had been stroking her cheek. I have to go, do I just got to go, Naruto stuttered out slightly, as he quickly walked away, leaving behind a blushing and confused Anne, as the seriousness of his compliment had caught her completely off guard. What was that all about? And thought with a frown, as her blush died off while she watched her friend basically run off. Last day of the convention. Things had gone well since the pool incident. They hadn't spoken about it, settling on it being just an odd situation that came with being friends. The convention had flown by rather quickly. They didn't need to do much during it except go to a few presentations, and for Anne's case present one. It of course went without any problems, and it was even easier for her, as Naruto was sitting in the front row to provide moral support. And though wasn't having too good a time, as she was on the phone with James, and for the last 5 minutes he had been talking to someone else at his work. "James, can you please listen to me?" Anne said with a frown. "Sorry about that, and work is just crazy," James said in a tone that told her he was only half paying attention, but it was better than nothing. "Well, I was wanting to call and say my trip has gone pretty good so far, and that I'll be back soon." "I've missed you," she said with a frown. "Yeah, that's great. I've really got to go back to work. They need me," James said before he quickly hung up before she could say anything. She had to calm herself down so she didn't throw the phone against the wall in frustration, and just settled for a loud groan into the pillow of her bed. She frowned as she sat up on her bed, deciding she was not going to let this ruin her last day on the trip when everything else had been going great. "You know what, I am not going to spend the last day sulking. I am going to relax, and maybe even get a drink," she thought with a smile, as she remembered that Naruto had gone down to the bar to relax for a bit. "Yeah, I can relax with Naruto. He'll make me forget all my stress like he always does," she thought with a warm smile, as she quickly grabbed her purse and lab coat while she left her room, heading towards the bar near the first floor of the hotel. Thankfully Naruto was never hard to miss with his mane of hair, as she noticed him instantly the second she walked into the bar. "Naruto, mind if I join you?" Anne asked with a giggle, as she sat down next to him, as he turned and smiled at her. "Well, Ms. Possible, I didn't think you would try to pick up little old me in a bar," Naruto told her with clear amusement in his voice, as he batted his eyelashes at her, and couldn't help but laugh at his silly nature. He could be so serious at work, but when it was just the two of them he showed a far more joyful and silly side. She couldn't help but feel special that Naruto can open up with her so much to show this side of himself. "Well, I've decided to use this last day to relax, gamble a bit, drink, and have fun. I was wanting to know if you wanted to come with," she said with a smile, as he smirked and nodded. "Sounds perfect. But if we are going to have a night on the town you need to change your clothes," he said, as she frowned. "Why? What's wrong with my outfit?" she asked, as she looked down at her clothes. "They scream doctor and responsibility. Lose the lab coat and change into some more party-style clothes," he said, as he made her stand up, as he started to take off her lab coat. "But I," she started to say before he stopped her with a tsk of his tongue. "But nothing. You want to relax and cut loose, right?" he asked, as she nodded. "Then lose the stuff that reminds you of all your responsibilities for the night," he said, as she frowned, but nodded, as she let him take off her coat before he folded it up and handed it to her. "Now go back to the room and get changed. I'll stay here and wait for you," he said, as she smiled warmly. "Okay, I'll be right back," and said, as he gave her a playful salute. "Sounds good. And no coat or else," he threatened playfully, as she saluted him back before leaving to change in her room again. Naruto didn't know how long she took, as he wasn't keeping track, but for him it felt like only a minute, as he heard and clear her throat behind him, as he swiveled around on his chair, and froze as he saw her and her new outfit, and had ditched all of her usual clothes, as she walked down the steps of the bar towards him in a sleek, somewhat short black cocktail dress. The dress did little to hide her figure, as it squeezed her upias to enhance them, even with the modest neckline. Her hair was straightened, adding a few inches to her short style, as he noticed her eyeshadow and makeup made her light blue eyes turn many shades darker. Watching her step down the stairs, giving a slight sway to her hips, he noticed how well she looked in heels that did a lot to make her rear look even more firm from the bit he could see of it. They even worked to make her already long-toned legs look even more stunning. Wow, I am a believer," he muttered out, as Anne smirked confused at him. "Believer of what?" she asked, as he gently took her hand and bowed slightly. "That I am in the presence of a stunning goddess of beauty," he said, as her cheeks quickly turned dark before she covered her cheeks with her small black purse that she had moved to for special occasions. "Shush you, now what is the first of our night of relaxation?" Anne said, as Naruto cleared his throat and stood up. "Well, how does a drink go, and a bit of gambling sound?" he asked with a smirk while offering her his arm. "That sounds like a great start," she said, as she linked her arm with his, as he motioned to the bartender for 2 drinks, who quickly delivered, as they shot down their drinks and started their night. Their night after that was somewhat of a blur due to the number of drinks they consumed. All in all, they had drunk several drinks, gambled, which was something Naruto was great at, saw some shows around the strip, and he even took her shopping at some of the stores around the strip, as he wouldn't let her pay for any of it. Thankfully they were able to deliver everything to their hotel room. There was even a party that Naruto was able to get them to slip into, which turned out to be full of rich and famous people. The entire party was fun, as for the entire time there everyone mistook them for husband, and wife or boyfriend, and girlfriend, which due to their buzz, they played along with, and couldn't help but laugh loudly, as Naruto carried her on his back, and was running through the crowd of people while she held onto him with one hand, and her heels in the other. "Slow down, Naruto, you're going too fast," she giggled out, as she rested her head on top of his. "Fine, if the lady wants it then the lady gets it," he said with a laugh, as he carefully sat her down on a bench, as she smiled at the sight of the fountain out front of the Bellagio fountains. "So what to tell me what brought along this whole go wild last night situation?" Naruto asked, as she leaned against him for support. "I don't want to talk about it," she muttered with a deep frown, as in her drunken state her emotions weren't easily hidden. "And what's wrong?" he asked with a frown, as he stroked her cheeks, wiping away the tears that were slowly escaping and sliding down her cheeks. "Tears don't suit your beautiful face at all," he whispered out, as that seemed to be the last bit of nudging, as a second later she buried her face in his chest and started to cry. It's everything, Naruto," she sobbed out. "My marriage is crumbling to the point where James hasn't even kissed me in almost a year. The most I get of him is a stupid kiss on the cheek, and a goodbye. He rarely even really talks to me except for the few minutes I get when we are out of the house." She choked out in between sobs, as Naruto frowned deeply at all the sadness she was holding inside. "It's okay, and let it out," he said with a frown, as he let and cry into his chest before he frowned at all the looks they were getting. "On second hand, let's get back to the hotel room," he said, as he let and climbed back onto his back, still crying, as she held onto his neck. "Why has this happened to me? I used to have a perfect marriage, but everything just fell apart so suddenly," and cried out, as she buried her face in the crook of his neck. Naruto frowned, as he couldn't offer much in the terms of advice, so he settled on being a shoulder to cry on, and vent to. His frown worsened, as he set her down on her feet in front of her room door. He let out a tired sigh, as the sight of and crying tore him up inside before he put his hands on her shoulders, as he looked her in the eyes and, "I wish I could be more help. I really do, but I hope you take solace that I will always be here for you no matter what happens. I promise," he said, as he stroked her cheek softly. "And you know I never break my promises," he added with a smile, as Anne looked up at him, and, even in her drunken state, could clearly see the seriousness in his eyes, as he continued, "I will stay by your side, and be here for you, and you're important to me. I'll do my best to help you get through whatever troubles you have to deal with." He finished before she did something that surprised the both of them. She kissed him. Naruto, even in his drunken haze, could feel her soft warmness against his. He widened his eyes in moderate shock, as he was slightly frozen by the fact that, and the woman who was his close friend, was kissing him. The one reason he didn't push her away was because for a while now he has had a massive crush on Anne. Of course, with her being married he knew it would be an unrequited crush, but he had settled for just being there for her, as a friend if she needed it. Hence why his body was struggling to come to terms with Anne's against his. When his body did catch up, it beat out his head, which was telling him this was wrong, and made him put his hands around her back, pulling her in close. And was next to be surprised, as she expected for the kiss to be a friendly peck, though a part of her in the back of her mind told her that was a lie from how she had started the kiss. "I have to stop, this is wrong," she thought with a blush. Though, as much as she hated to admit the feeling, her sent shivers of pure excitement through her body, causing her mind to take the back seat when coupled with the alcohol in her system. She was honestly a bit shocked, and overcome by the amount of love and passion that was in the kisses that Naruto was giving her, a feeling she had longed for and missed for nearly a year. The strength of her due to the absence of it for so long in her life, along with the generous amount of alcohol consumed, made her self-restraint shut down completely, as her eyes slid shut and started. This continued until the point she thought she would seriously reach her limit on his leg before she heard the click of the door opening behind her. The next morning, Anne's head hurt. As she tried to wake up, the light of the open blinds almost blinding her, as she could feel the hangover attacking her. She groaned, as she could barely remember anything past the Bellagio fountain. Her eyes widened and shot open, as she felt something throb in her before she slowly looked down to see Naruto. Her face went pale, as she sat up, and, as she looked down to see that they were connected, her body reacted before she could gather her thoughts, as she quickly slapped him and backed off him, pressing her back up against the wall, as flashes of their acts last night flooded her head. Tears poured from her eyes, as she blamed herself for it since she kissed him first, as her body slid down to the floor, letting her hug her knees close to her chest. Naruto woke up with a groan, as he felt a strong slap to his face before the source of warmth he had been holding on to ran off. He drowned lightly, as he looked around the room. His eyes widened, as his mind put the dots together faster than his memories could, which came a second later, as his face went pale, and took the blanket off the bed, using the sheet to cover himself, as he set the blanket over and to cover herself, who showed no signs of reacting besides crying. "Did last night really happen?" he asked with a frown, as in barely nodded her head. "And I am so sorry, it's all my fault. I'm the one that got you drunk, and took advantage of you," he said in a hurt tone, as she looked up, showing her tear-stricken face, as she shook her head. "Naruto, we were both drunk, and I'm the one that initiated it with the kiss. I'm the terrible cheating wife," she cried out, as she buried her face back into her legs that she hugged closer to her. "I cheated on James, my husband. I'm a terrible wife," she cried, as she felt Naruto gingerly rub her back, as if he wasn't allowed to touch her. As she looked up, she could even see the hurt in his eyes, as if he was blaming himself for it all. "And it was one night of drunken weakness. We can forget about this, pretend it never happened, and never mention it. I don't want to make you hurt like this," he said, as in frowned. "You didn't do this." "I did," she said before he shook his head with a deep frown. "I made you go out drinking with me, which led to all of this. If I didn't, then none of this would have happened," he said, as in could see that he was clutching his fists tight enough to draw blood from his palms. "Please, and just forget about it so you don't eat yourself up over it. I don't want to be the reason why you are so hurt," he choked out, as in frowned, and grabbed his hands, making him stop clenching them. "I'll forget, as long as you stop beating yourself up, as well. It was a moment of our weakness," and said with dry laugh, as Naruto frowned, and nodded. "I should probably stay away from you for a while so I don't remind you of this mistake," he said, as in frowned about the protests before she realized it's probably for the best. "Okay," she said weakly, as he nodded with a sad smile. "Just remember that this was a one-time mistake, and you are still a great loving and caring wife. Repeat it to yourself if you are in doubt," he said before he slipped his hands out of hers, and nodded weakly, as she saw Naruto walk towards his door. A part of her felt a ping of pain, and more guilt shot through her, as she felt like she was losing an important part of herself, and that she was putting all of this on Naruto before she shook it off, as he had to go away for a bit. It was the only way they could recover. She waited until the conjoining room doors shut before she stood up, and bit her lip, as she felt. "I need a shower," she thought with a frown, as she grabbed a change of clothes out of her suitcase before going into the shower. She calmed herself, as best as she could, as she felt his seed trickle out of her with help of the shower head. During the shower her mind kept wandering back to the last minutes before she passed out. She heard Naruto's voice say the line while it repeated in her head over and over again. She frowned before she shook the words out of her head before she focused on getting clean. She spent a good 10 minutes in the shower before she stepped out and started packing, as she had to get to the airport in a few hours. She frowned as she noticed a note near the conjoining door, as she picked it up. "And I thought it would be best for me to move my flight back to a later one so as not to force you to be near me after everything that has happened. I set up a paid-for taxi to take you home when you return to the Upperton airport. I'll still be at work tomorrow, so I guess I'll see you then." "Naruto," she read, as she frowned, but nodded, as she felt it was for the best. She knew she would recover from this, she had to. This was a mistake that was causing her to lose her friend. She hoped it would get better since her friend meant a lot to her. It didn't take long for her to pack her bags, as she stood at the door of her room. She frowned, as she looked back at the room, at the bed where she cheated on her husband, and had an intense night with a good friend of hers that was a few years younger than her. It was the room that started the chain of events that would change Anne, and her life forever. And frowned, as she stared up at the ceiling of her bedroom, as it was the night after she had gotten back from Vegas, and she had all but forced her husband to have sex with her, feeling she had to have sex with him to get her last time out of her head. The reason for her frown was the fact that her husband wasn't nearly as good as she remembered. She even tried her best to make it even more intimate with some dirty talk, but he just finished on his own, and rolled over like he had done his job, leaving her extremely unsatisfied. He didn't even give her a kiss or even an "I love you" after he finished. It was like he was just using her to get his release, and that was it. It made her curl up on her side of the bed, as James smiled at his release. The fact that this was her married love life saddened her a bit. Tried as she might, she tried to keep the memories of her time with Naruto resurfaced, and how entirely different it was from the lackluster pumps of her husband. As she tried to get the thoughts of the powerful night she had with Naruto out of her head, her hand subconsciously snaked its way down to between her legs. The second she realized it, she quickly pulled it away, and beat herself up for it mentally. She wasn't supposed to feel like this. She was a married woman. She was supposed to only be with her husband, and yet the memories of the night with Naruto replayed in her head. "I just want this out of my head," she thought with a tired sigh, as she hoped that this would stop. She didn't want her marriage to fade away because of one drunken night, no matter how passionate and utterly pleasurable it was in her drunken state. Once again, as her head was busy reminiscing, her hand made its way down, and started to play with the hard bundle of nerves in between her legs. In the daze of her thoughts, it took her until she pinched it for her to once again realize what her body was doing. Ugh, I need to stop this, and thought with a groan, as she rolled over and buried her face in her pillow, stuffing her hands under the pillow in hope that her body would stop betraying her and let her sleep. 1 month later, and groaned as she threw her pillow at her alarm clock, as for nearly the whole month she hadn't been getting enough sleep, causing her to take naps during lunch, and a lot during her days off. Ever since Vegas, her dreams were full of various situations of her having sex with a faceless figure, though the mane of red hair was a clear giveaway to who her dreams were giving her. She frowned as she looked over to her husband, who was rushing to get ready for work, not even caring that she most likely broke the alarm clock. "Why are you in such a rush?" she asked with a frown, deepening it, as James didn't even turn around to tell her good morning. "I have to head to work fast. They called me a bit ago to call me in. They said I might have to work late at night, so don't wait up," James said, as he quickly ran by her and gave her a kiss on the cheek. She let out a tired sigh, as she hadn't been able to get her husband to try and make love with her ever since the time she forced him after her Vegas trip. He had been busy nearly every day, leaving her at home alone, and it was starting to pay its toll on her, especially when she no longer really could go to the person she normally vented to since Vegas. Her body just seemed to go through the motions, as she made breakfast for her children, dropped them off at school until she had to pick up the twins, and cook dinner. It wasn't until she fell back on the bed that she snapped out of it, and let out a tired and sad sigh, burying her face in her hands. This is sad, she thought, as she felt an empty pain in her chest. You know what, she thought, as she sat up on her bed with narrowed eyes. It has been a month. It was a singular mistake. As long as I make sure it never happens again, I think I deserve to have my friend back, she thought, as she quickly grabbed her cell phone and dialed Naruto's number, a bit nervous to hear his voice. She felt her heart pound in her chest as she found herself sitting up against the headboard of her bed as the phone rang in her ear. She had to force herself not to look at the ID picture that she had set for Naruto, as it was displayed on her smartphone. Her picture for him was one of him smiling at her, as he was eating ramen at one of their lunches with a few noodles hanging out of the corner of his mouth. She also knew that the picture he had for her in his phone was her famous puppy dog pout that he had gotten her to do again. He said the reason for it was that he wanted to make sure he didn't miss a call from her, and found he couldn't do anything but answer with her pout staring at him, and quickly was brought out of her thoughts as the phone clicked, signaling he answered the call. Her voice froze a bit, as she couldn't get the words out of her mouth. "En? Is that you?" Naruto's voice asked out, as she swallowed her nerves. "Why yeah, it's me, Naruto," she said, as she almost felt a chill down her spine, as he said her name in almost shock. But then again, they hadn't talked or really hung out in over a month, so it made sense. "I just needed someone to talk to, and you're the only one I could think of," she added, as she heard a soft chuckle on his end of the line. "Well, I'm glad I can still be here for you. It means a lot," he said in a soft tone, as in felt another shiver go down her spine, as the sound of hearing his voice in her ear. As for the last month, her dreams had been torturing her. There wasn't a day that her dreams didn't include a red-haired man that was clearly Naruto in it. It wasn't that the dreams were all sags, some of them were just pure romance like picnics or dates. They all did still torture her, as she was supposed to be a loyal wife and not have reoccurring dreams of another man, and shook her head with a frown, as she cleared her throat. "Well, I don't have anyone else to really talk to, so you are the only one. How have you been?" she asked, as she frowned a bit. "I've been okay. Work is still the same, as your boss. I've been going to the gym a lot. I just got back from a workout session, and got out of the shower a bit ago. Now I'm just watching TV, and eating pizza," he said, as in slightly bit her lip, as her head visualized him sitting on his couch in his boxers before she very quickly shook the thought out of her head. "What about you?" he asked as she frowned. "You know, the same, as always." James being the same, she said with a frown, as she had already told him about everything involving her marriage back in Vegas. "I'm sorry, Ann, I've never been married or anything, so I can't understand your pain, but I do wish I could help," Mirai said, as in clenched her fist with a frown, as she wanted to say "you already are," just by talking, but felt that would be inappropriate. She forced herself to smile, as they slowly returned to their normal flow. She even found herself laughing at a story of what happened to him at work last week, before she even realized that she was laying on her stomach smiling, as she talked with him for over 2 hours. She was slightly surprised that she was acting like she did when she was a teenager, and on long calls with James back when they were kids. Though despite how much she was enjoying it, she didn't mind the nagging feeling that was stirring in her chest of "this is how it should be." Naruto chuckled, as she could almost hear the smile on his face through his laugh. "You don't know how much I have missed hearing your beautiful voice every day, even if it's just a call," said in a saddened tone, as in felt her face heat up while she bit her lip. She was caught off guard by how sweet and sincere it sounded, and how sad he sounded. She closed her eyes, as she could almost imagine his face before she clenched her fist. I've missed you, as well Naruto, as well, and all you do for me, she said in a slightly sad tone. Their talking continued, but only now had a melancholy feel to it, as they started to say the things they were missing. From things like their morning coffee that he always brought her to their lunches at the hospital, and the dinners that she often invited him over to her house. Eventually their talk moved on to Vegas, only this time it didn't have the torn-up feeling to it. You know, I still can't believe how beautiful you looked in that evening dress, said in a genuine tone with a hint of fear, as if he almost was afraid to mention it. She couldn't stop herself from blushing and smiling, as it had been a very long time since she dressed up and got complimented for her looks. Vegas was the first in a long time since she had done so. Thanks Naruto, that means a lot, she said in a soft whisper, as their talk slowly turned to the topic of Vegas. They were both smiling, as they reminisced about the fun they had at the pool, in the casinos, and even the party they crashed. Silence quickly filled the call, as they awkwardly reached the end of Vegas, which was the night of their deed. As An replayed it in her head, she felt her cheeks heat up before she replayed the I love you and that Naruto had whispered to her before they had passed out. Naruto? She asked, as Naruto nervously cleared his throat. Yes, An? He asked as she bit her lip, as he wondered if she should ask him this or leave it be. Her curiosity won, as she tried to wet her dry mouth. What was with that I love you that you said to me at the end of it? He asked, as she could hear him coughing, as if she had shocked him while he was trying to drink something. What? I don't know what you're talking about. So how was your flight back? He asked, completely avoiding the question. You do know what I am talking about. Your way of avoiding it is terrible. Just tell me what you meant by it, she pushed, as that line was the thing that was eating her up the most. Naruto was silent for what felt like a few minutes before he cleared his throat. I really don't want to talk about what, and sighed in an almost torn-up tone. It was really great talking with you again, and honestly, you are the only one that can make me smile like this. He sighed in a new warm tone that made her blush madly, and even make her swear her heart skipped a beat for a quick second. I'll talk to you later, maybe at work again, he asked before he hung up, leaving her lying on the bed. She frowned, and let out a sigh, as she didn't get the answer she wanted or needed. She stayed on the bed, still laying on her stomach, as she contemplated how adamantly Naruto refused to talk about what he said to her. It only made her want an answer even more. With how her life had become a mess, and the recent event in Vegas, it only stirred things up even more. Her frown lessened, as she went to her pictures on her phone, flipped through them, smiling a bit at all the ones of her and Naruto, even a few drunken ones that they had taken during their last night in Vegas. The smile fell a bit, as she realized that in the whole year or so since James had started to stop showing her attention, there were no new pictures of her and James. Naruto seemed to be filling her photo album in her phone. They had grown so close ever since he started working at her hospital, to the point where they even went out to eat, as friends during their off times. That's it, she thought, as she rolled over onto her back, and sat up on her bed. I need this answer, and I will get it, she thought, as a fire lit in her eyes. The I love you had caused her too much strife, and she needed to know if it was just a drunken muttering or... She didn't continue that train of thought, as she shook it off, and skipped over it. I need to know, I'll talk to him tomorrow, and get my answer, she thought, as she fell back onto the bed, and decided tomorrow would get her the answers she needed. Setting her phone down on her nightstand, she sighed, as she decided it was getting late, and to go to bed, hoping that maybe listening to Naruto would calm down her dreams a bit since he always appeared in them. Next morning, Anne's eyes shot open, as she sat up on her bed, sweaty and panting, as she was shocked by her dream, only just being woken up by the alarm she set on her phone, and somewhat thankful that it did wake her up. Last night's dream was her most sexual and kinkiest dream she has had yet. She frowned slightly, as she threw off her blanket. Over the last month she had gotten to the point where waking up like this wasn't too surprising. She didn't deny that her body was still reacting from the Vegas incident, but she still knew it was wrong, and she did all she could to remember that. She let out a relaxed sigh, as she turned on the hot water, allowing it to relax her stiff muscles, as well as wash away to proof of her arousal. That dream was really intense, she thought, as she bit her lip, and how intense it was. The kind different from the water, refused to die down. She didn't know if it was from the dream or the fact that she brought up the Vegas incident with Naruto last night, or even the fact that she had gone a month without any kinds of sags made her arousal grow to the point that she was caught up in it all. She almost couldn't stop herself, as she found herself pleasuring herself to it, and surprisingly was already near her limit, something that slightly worried her. She was just starting to get past this all, and one powerful dream was enough for her to lose all progress. She bit her lip, as she was just about to reach her point, but before she could she was startled out of it, as James burst into the bathroom, getting ready for work again, not even caring that she was in the bathroom already, and groaned, as she let out a noise that was a mix between a whine and a growl, as she had been refused this little bit of pleasure by James again. "Honey," she said in a strained voice, "couldn't you have knocked or something?" she asked, as James didn't look at her, as he focused on shaving. "Sorry there, Ann, but I really have to get ready fast. We are close to this really major breakthrough at work," he said, not noticing the slight glare in Ann's eyes before she sighed and shook it off. "Fine, I'm just taking a shower," she said, as she smirked and opened the shower door slightly. "Maybe you want to come join me?" she asked with a seductive tone before she frowned, as he had already rushed out of the bathroom, done with whatever he had to do. "Don't know what I was expecting there, but can't blame a girl for trying," she thought with a sigh, as she finished up with her shower. As she still had to cook breakfast for the kids, she frowned, as she continued to wash herself, avoiding between her legs, as she was more than sure she had washed it enough already. "Of course, even if James did come in here, I doubt he could really satisfy me anymore," she thought before her eyes widened, and she quickly shook her head, using the hot water to snap her out of it. Where in the world did that come from? That was strange, she thought with a frown, as she should be wanting contact with her husband, not putting it down. "I really got to get over all this, and get back to being a wife. Today I will get my answer, and this will all be in the past," she thought, as she turned off the water, and stepped out of the shower to dry off and get dressed. She frowned slightly, still shaking the thoughts out of her head, as she started to get breakfast ready for her kids. She was surprised that James hadn't left already, as he ran down the stairs, flew by her, and gave her his textbook kiss on the cheek, which only served to make her frown more. She wanted a real kiss, not this chase, barely even a kiss on the cheek that James always gave her. She bit her lip softly, as she looked at the door that went to the garage that James just let out of, as her mind recalled the powerful kiss she received in Vegas where she was pinned against the door. That was passion and romance she hadn't felt in a long time. The last time she did anything even remotely intense in public was in college, where James stroked her, but during a light make-out session on campus. That time couldn't weigh up to the intensity and passion he showed her in that public hallway. She couldn't help but feel a moan creep up in her throat as she was reliving the moment of their tongues crashing. She almost slid her hand down between her legs before two voices snapped her out of it and doused her arousal, as if a bucket of ice water was dumped on her. "Mom, is breakfast ready?" Jim and Tim yelled out, as she quickly fanned her hot face and turned towards the twins. "Just finished," she said, steadying her voice as she cleared her throat. "Go sit down, and I'll bring it to the table," she added, as they nodded and ran to the table. She was a bit thankful that the twins showed up, as her head this morning was having a bad habit of drifting off. "Hey Mom, do you know when Naruto is going to come over again? He's been gone for a month, and we still have to go see that action movie he promised us," Jim said, as Tim nodded along. "Yeah, and we need to beat him at our new video game for payback from when he beat us at the racing one," Tim said with a smile, as Ann frowned slightly, but shook it off. "Well, if all goes well today at work, then he should be coming back up very soon. He should be done with his medical study," Ann said, as she had come up with that lie to cover up the fact that he was giving her space after everything that had happened in Vegas. "Sweet, we are going to beat him at our game," Jim said, as Tim raised his hand. "Hickabicaboo," Tim said, as Jim gave his brother a high five. "Hoosha," Jim said, as Ann chuckled, and started setting the food on the table for them to plate up. She did hope everything went well with Naruto today, because he wasn't just her friend, he was also a friend to her kids, and they also seemed to miss him almost as much as she missed him. It honestly stirred some fear in her from missing a man that wasn't her husband. She really needed to get to work to clear this up. Maybe she could finally get some peace of mind for once. Upperton Medical Center, and was slightly nervous as she walked into the hospital. She had sent Naruto a text asking if they could have lunch like they always used to, since today they were working at different parts of the hospital until after lunch. The day almost flew by, as 1 second she had just walked into the hospital, and she felt like the next minute it was her time for lunch. Her nervousness only grew as she got closer to the lunchroom. With how the day flew by, she hadn't had time to steel her nerves for the conversation she was planning to have with him. She felt her heart speed up as she saw him sitting at their usual table, as he was looking around for her. She felt a pang in her heart as she saw the sad look in his eyes, as if he was afraid that she had changed her mind about them spending time together as friends. The pang went away as she noticed how he looked at her, and blushed at the happiness and something she thought looked like love in his eyes. It reminded her of how he looked at her during that night, how his eyes were full of lust and love. Her blush increased as she noticed that while he didn't realize she was looking at him, he was looking at her. He looked at her with a look of love, but also noticed him checking her out. It was quick, as if he was almost forcing himself not to look at her in that way, but it was very clear he was looking at every inch of her figure. The blush only grew as she realized it wasn't just lust and love in his eyes, but also appreciation and admiration, as if he was truly captivated by her. She smiled nervously, as she waved at him, and started to walk over, watching his eyes travel up her legs to her hips, all the way up her body before reaching her eyes, as he gave her his trademark large smile. "It's good to see you," and Naruto said, as he nervously stood up, unsure of what to do. "Yeah, it's good to see you too," and said, as she too was unsure of what to do. She frowned before she remembered that she was here to get past the event in Vegas, and hopefully go back to how they used to be. With that in mind, she quickly walked over, and wrapped him in a hug, almost shocking him, as it took him a second to return it. Naruto's instincts reacted the second he felt En's body pressed against his, causing him to wrap his arms around her lower back, and hug her back. En's head was swimming, as she was sent into a slight daze, as she felt his warm body pressed against hers, as well as the familiar scent that, while not as strong as that night, was potent enough to make her bury her face in the crook of his neck. She didn't even notice how tight their embrace was, and how long they were spending, standing in the cafeteria before both of them realized what they were doing, and pulled away from each other, blushing softly. "How has your day been?" Naruto asked, trying to move the conversation along so they weren't just awkwardly standing. "Exhausting, and that was before I got to work," and said with a slight frown, but shook it off, and smiled at him. "But don't worry about that. How have you been over this last month?" she asked with a soft smile, as they sat down, and talked, just like they used to, and blushed softly, as while she talked she noticed how Naruto was looking at her while he listened to her story. Even while just sitting down he was looking at her lips, and peering over her figure. She could feel his eyes almost tracing every inch of her while he was still paying attention to her by the way he responded to her story, and added to it. As much as she didn't want to admit it, she didn't find herself minding it much at all. She was almost too stuck in her thoughts that she didn't notice the photo he brought out. "En, you okay?" he asked, as she blushed, and she nodded. "Yeah, sorry I spaced out for a second," she said, as he chuckled at her with a smile that made her blush darken a bit. "Well, I was saying I took this picture of my pet fox because she reminded me of you," he said, as he slid his phone across the table to her. "Ah, that is adorable," and squealed out, as she saw the picture of a red fox looking up at the camera with a pout that looked almost exactly like her puppy dog pout. "I don't know where Komi learned this from, but I am blaming you," he teased, as she giggled. "Is she a girl?" and asked, as he nodded. "Well, that makes sense. All girls have to have some way to get what they want," and teased, as he rolled his eyes, and chuckled. "Well, that is true. You both seem to have those large, expressive, and beautiful eyes," he said, as he looked her in the eyes with a soft smile on his face, and quickly had to look away, as she felt her heart skip a beat, and her face heat up. "Thank you," she whispered out, as she didn't quite trust her voice. This had been the first time in a very, very long time that anyone complimented her on her eyes. She couldn't help but smile softly, as she realized Naruto didn't just look at her body, but at all of her. She felt her cheeks heat up, as she unconsciously moved her legs out from under the table, and crossed them. Her smile grew, as she saw how Naruto looked over to see what she had done, and how quickly his eyes were drawn to her legs, trailing them slowly, as if he was admiring them all the way from her ankles to the rim of her skirt. She felt a bit proud of how just showing a bit of skin was able to draw his eyes so quickly. She had to bite her lips slightly, as the look in his eyes, as they met hers again. The look in his eyes sent a powerful shiver through her spine, as for just a second she recognized the same lust, hunger, and desire that had she kept remembering every time she thought back to Vegas. It was the jolt she needed to remember her main topic that she wanted to bring up to him. "Naruto, I know this is a sore subject, but can I ask you something about Vegas?" she asked, as he frowned slightly. "And if it is what I said, just drop it," he said, as she shook her head. "I can't drop it, Naruto. I want to know what you meant when you said you loved me. Was it just a drunken mumbling or what?" she asked, as he ran his hand through his hair with a groan. "I really don't want to talk about it," he said, as he pushed himself back from the table, and stood up, looking her in the eyes, giving her a pleading look before rushing off. Once he was gone and let out a breath she didn't even know she was holding, and held her hands up to her cheeks to feel how hot her cheeks were from all of that. The look on his face from after he checked out her legs reminded her too much of that night, and, as much as she tried to deny it, she couldn't bring herself to, and had to admit that it was a turn-on to her to be looked at like that by him. That didn't go quite as planned, she thought, as she moved her legs back under the table, and frowned, as she laid her head down on the table. "If anything, that just made things worse for my head. I'll just have to corner him in his office," she thought, as she sat back up with a nod, determined to get the answers she needed. This time the day couldn't have gone slower, as every time she looked at the time it seemed to be creeping by incredibly slowly. By the time she was officially off work she felt like she had been stuck there for several days. She frowned slightly, as she got a quick text from James. "Hey Ann, I'm going to be late coming home tonight. I know it's my day to cook, but can you take care of dinner tonight? Thanks," it read, Aizen sighed at the lack of any form of I love you in it, and quickly dialed up Kim's number, as she hurried off towards Naruto's office. Hey sweetie, your dad just texted me saying he's going to be late again, and since it's his day to cook, and I have something I need to take care of real quick at the hospital, can you order pizza for you and the boys? She asked in a hopeful tone. Sure thing mom, you won't be later, as well right? She asked, Aizen smiled. Hopefully not if this thing goes well. An hour or so, don't wait up. Love you sweetie, she said, as her daughter hung up just as she got to the door of Naruto's office just as he was about to leave. Not so fast lion boy, you are going to answer my question and said, as she poked him in the chest, making him take a step back. And please can you just let this go, Naruto said, as he watched and closed the blinds to his office, and even go as far to lock the door. No, I need an answer. Just tell me what you meant by it. Was it a drunken mistake or not, she said, as she crossed her arms, unintentionally pushing up her pious, as she gave him her mom's stare. I honestly don't know what you are talking about. I was drunk then, and my memory isn't too clear. In the end, he said with a sigh, as he leaned back against his desk, resting on it, as he stared at her with a frown, and narrowed her eyes as she stepped closer to him until they were merely inches apart. You and I both know that isn't true, Naruto. Plus I'm a mother. I can tell when someone lies, she said, as she poked his chest again. Just answer me. How hard is that? And said, as Naruto's eyes narrowed before he stood up, surprising her slightly. I'm not one of your children, and even if I am younger than you, you don't get to play the mother card, he said, as she frowned. I know you aren't my child, I don't, and can't see you like that, but I just want the truth please, she said, as he sighed. Why? Why is it so important for you to know this, Anne? He asked, as Aizen could see the storm of emotions in his eyes, as he clenched his fists with a frown. It just is, Naruto. Please just tell me what you meant, and said before she felt Naruto's hands grab her sides, making her look at him in the eyes, allowing her to see even more emotions whirring through them. I meant it. I love you, Anne. I fell for you so freaking quick when we became friends, but I have used every ounce of self-control to keep it bottled up. The one night in Vegas was when it all poured out. I wanted to just settle for that one night, not hurt you even more like this. This is why I kept this hidden, he said, getting louder and louder as her eyes grew wider. She could see all the love, fear, and passion stirring around in his eyes, as he stared down at her, and in all honesty it shocked her to her core, freezing her in place. As she was about to say something, she felt a jolt go through her. They stood in his office, as he gave her a long drawn-out passionate kiss that to her seemed to go on forever. Not that she minded it deep down. What you felt in Vegas may have been because of liquor, but these are my feelings, my desires, and my love for you. Something that has been around long before the first drink touched my lips, he said softly, as he stroked her cheek, trailing soft kisses along her jawline. I know I can never have you, Anne, and I know how loving you will only bring you pain, which is the last thing I want. I would rather have a heartache like this than see you be anything but happy, he said, as he started to make his way towards the door. It was then his turn to be surprised next, as he felt Anne's hands grab his hand, and pull him back, and kiss him, and was so swept up in everything, the seriousness and emotion in his confession, as well as the sacrifice he was willing to put himself through because of her. She continued to kiss him, trying to return the passion he was giving her before they had to stop, resting their foreheads against the others, as she looked up at him. This is wrong, she whispered out before she kissed him again softly. We can't do this, Naruto. No matter how good this feels, she muttered before he tilted her head up, and kissed her deeply, deeper than any of the other kisses she has had with him. They continued to kiss, and make out with one another before Naruto fell back onto his couch, leaving and panting, as she stood in front of the couch, trying to get her head together, as all the great feelings Naruto's kisses were giving her were becoming too much for her head, and bit her lip, as she felt Naruto's hands stroking her legs, going up her calves until he reached her thighs, but never went past her skirt. The jolts that she felt with each brush of his hands made her push his chest back against the couch before she slid up her pencil skirt a bit, and sat on his lap, straddling it with her legs on either side of him. She felt herself melt, as her body was against his while she ran her hands through his hair. She felt a smile creep onto her face, as she looked down at him, as he was panting with a smile on his face while he continued to stroke her thighs. Did you mean what you said about loving me, and not wanting to hurt me? She asked, as he nodded, and cupped her cheek, stroking it softly. I meant every word, but if you continue I don't think I'll be able to bottle these feelings up anymore. I won't be able to act like I don't truly love you or contain myself from kissing those soft, full lips every chance I get, he said, as he traced his thumb over her lower lip. I also wouldn't be able to contain myself from giving you all the passion and pleasure you have been missing, and deserve, he whispered out, Aizen bit her lip. You have all the power, and if you decide to get off me I swear I will act like this never happened, this or Vegas, he said. Aizen frowned. "Will you still be my friend?" Anne asked, as she resisted the urge to suck on his finger. "I'll try. But with everything it would be hard and painful, but if it makes you happy I can live with it. The only thing I care about is you," he said, as he stroked her cheek. She could only smile up at him, as her orgasm died down before his eyes widened and she shot up off his lap. "I can't believe I went through with this," she thought, as she started to pace around the office, slightly hyperventilating before she felt a pair of strong arms wrap around her shoulders, almost instantly calming her down. "Relax, Anne, everything is okay," he whispered into her ear, as he turned her around and kissed her. "I'm sorry if I pushed you too far with that," he said, as she shook her head. "That's not it, I'm just still a bit in shock that I went through with this," she said, as he smiled and stroked her cheek. "Well, I'm pretty sure a date, say next time you have a day off, will fix that. A whole day with you would be amazing, especially if I get you to show off that lovely smile of yours," he said, as she bit her lip and looked up at him. She knew, almost for a fact, that if she spent a whole day with Naruto she would most likely sleep with him again. The gnawing feeling inside her that made her question, were these feelings worth having an affair for? And felt her face heat up, as she buried her face into his chest, too embarrassed to look him in the eyes, as she was acting like a teenager, embarrassed to confess her feelings for him. She nodded, as she smiled, feeling him pet her head, as he felt his other hand go down her back before rubbing her ass. She rolled her eyes with a smile, as she looked up at him, a bit happy that he couldn't keep his hands off her. It made her feel desirable, and like a woman again. Her smile grew, as he tilted her head up, and gave her a kiss. Only this kiss was more powerful than the others, the way his tongue moved around in her mouth and stroked her tongue. She was caught up massively by the kiss, as she ran her hands through his hair, and gripped it tightly for support. The kiss lasted for what felt like hours before they broke apart with a smile. "You should probably get dressed again, I'll wait outside," he said, as he motioned to her exposed uppias, making her blush before she smiled and nodded. She waited until Naruto left before she started to fix her skirt and put back on her bra and shirt. The second she was done she exited his office to see him leaning against the wall next to the door. "Well, ready to go home? I'll at least walk you to your car," he said, as he offered his arm to her with a smile. "That sounds wonderful," she said, as she linked her arm with his, uncaring if people saw them since they already were known to be good friends, and no one would think anything of it. Her smile didn't falter, as he opened her car door for her, and closed it for her before she rolled down the window for him, letting him lean in it and smile at her. "I'll see you tomorrow, I guess, since we are both on shift." "I'll call you tomorrow if you want," he said with a smile, as he stroked her cheek. "Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow," she said with a smile. "I love you, Anne," he said, as she smiled, still in a slight daze from the kiss before she snapped out at him and looked at him nervously. She started to stammer a bit before he silenced her with another kiss. "You don't have to say it back if it doesn't feel right to you just yet. This is new to you, and you're still coming to terms with everything, but don't think I won't do everything I can to earn it. A great and beautiful woman like you is worth the effort," he said with a warm smile, making her smile happily and nod, thankful he wasn't pushing her for her to say it back immediately. "Thank you," she said, as he smiled and kissed her cheek. "Anything for you, Anne. Drive home safely," he said, as she nodded and started the car, smiling as he watched her pull out of the parking lot. The entire drive home her smile never left her face, as the content feeling that was flooding her refused to go away. It even made the drive home go by even faster than normal. She couldn't help but let out a slight giggle, as she could still feel his lips on hers. "Well, Mom, what made you so happy? You seem happier than you have all month," Kim asked, as Anne smiled at her and the twins, as they sat on the couch in the living room eating pizza. "Oh, not much, just some good stuff happened at the hospital. Naruto has finished his project, so we were able to have lunch together," she said, as Kim smiled, glad her mom got her friend back, as he had been very busy recently. "And he might be coming over for a visit soon," she added, as the twins cheered, and Anne smiled, ruffling her boy's hair, as she was glad they liked him. "I'm going to take a quick shower, work was a bit tiring," she said, as she fanned herself, still a bit hot from her activities in Naruto's office. "Go ahead, Mom, I got the twins covered," Kim said with a smirk, as Anne smiled and walked to her room. As she started to get undressed in her bathroom she stopped just as she got down and looked at herself in the mirror. She couldn't help but blush at the now clearly visible hickey that was on her right uppi. She bit her lip softly, as a shiver ran through her spine as she ran her hand over it, a bit of arousal pairing with it, as the thought of being marked by another man and not seeing it as a mark of shame or betrayal made it feel even more powerful to her, and frowned slightly as she noticed she was using her left hand to run over the hickey, the hand that had her wedding ring on it. It made her wonder a bit, even with how bad it sounded to her, which symbol meant more to her right now. the symbol of marriage to a man that has been completely neglecting her for a year, or the new symbol of a relationship she started with a man that had so much passion and love for her. She continued to debate in her head before she looked back at the hickey and remembered the date with Naruto she had planned for their next day off. The thought of what would happen on that date made her smile and lick her lips in a sensual and excited manner, unknowingly making her decision. As she stripped down for the shower, excited for tomorrow and her time with Naruto. The end. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.